Good afternoon or good evening. How you
Good
doing?
evening. You can now bring your PowerPoint back up. I really appreciate your hanging on through our technological check and our chit chat. And here we are, ready to go. Thank you so much.
Okay. You tell me when you're ready to start talking. Are you ready?
It's ready for you to go. Thank you.
Uh, well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. It's been a while since COVID. I kind of got off from uh, Zoom, but I'm glad to be back on. I know the format changed a little bit, but I'm glad to be here. And it's steaming down here. It was 97 degrees today. My name's Buddy Lee. I developed the Encore Azaleas. I've been working with azaleas, a lot of plants for many, many years. And I think you know, I grew up in a fairly low population area, or backwoods, if you want to call it. But they had some really nice uh, azalea gardens in that area. Some wealthy merchants and people from New Orleans and Mobile area really planted some nice azalea gardens, and it was free to the public at that time. It wasn't something that they charged for, and but it was open like 2 months out of the year. And this garden here is called Z Murray Gardens, Sam Z Murray, and his wife actually planted this garden over the years and didn't tell him anything about it. And then one day, many years into the development of it, she took him to this garden. And he was fascinated. And I often wonder how distracted can a man be if his wife can plant a fabulous garden like that and he doesn't know anything about it. But it's a beautiful garden, and it was open to the public early. And when I was young, my parents would take me there, and it was about 8 miles from my house. I used to ride there, and I just kind of fell in love with azaleas. But at that time, azaleas were everywhere. It was the backbone of the gardens, and it was just a beautiful place. Camellias and azaleas, and so I just kind of I grew up on a dairy farm, a beef and row crop corn. I mean farm. So I was I really enjoyed the outdoors and growing plants. And over the years, you would get these all these old Southern indicas, azaleas, and the carum azaleas, and all these older forms of azaleas, and they would just let them grow up, and they would intertwine with each other. And back in those days, I guess in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, people kind of aimed to have their azaleas bloom all at the same time. So when they bloomed, you just had this spectacular show of azaleas, and there was years. I mean, it was breathtaking. All these azaleas planted around a 20-acre Clearwater lake and a dogwoods and everything. So I mean, that really pushed me over the edge just for the appreciation of azaleas and plants. Um, I'm from Louisiana. Let's see. Uh, right here, I would say this is the Piney Woods, a part of Louisiana. This is more French Acadian, and this is New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And so there's a influx of French and English, Irish kind of clash of people here from the old days. Now it's suburbs and people working in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, but it's very piney woods, and the ground is acidic. It's very adaptable to azaleas, to grow azaleas. The water, our groundwater, is usually it's a great aquifer, has a water pH of about 5.2 or something like that, which is kind of unusual, but it's great for growing azaleas. Baton Rouge is here, New Orleans is there. So, and when I grew up, I went to a school and we only had 3 or 4 people in my first grade class. But when I graduated, they had close to 300. A lot of, but it might be South Louisiana, but we are still in North America, and we do have the chance of getting slammed. Just like this year, we got I don't know 10 inches of snow at 9 degrees, and But this year it was a really nice snow. It was cold enough where it didn't stick to everything, but I still had to get it out there and on my greenhouses. And about 3 times I had to make sure that the weight of the snow didn't cave in. And sometimes that'll catch Southerners by surprise. They enjoying the snow, and next thing you know, their greenhouse is down. But it coated, and snow is a good thing, especially when it's like powdery stuff. And this is my nursery now. I've moved around a good bit. Well, close moved around, moved to different properties, but this property here is where I'm working at now. And this was a nursery for over 100 years before I bought it. There was some land that came up for sale, and the family really needed the money. This was all grown up when I bought it, but this is one of the old George Tabor that's left on the property. The old, well-known George Tabor. It grows in the DC area. Sometimes it gets banged up, but it's a good performer. Now, all this stuff down here is hybrids of mine. I mean, this entire area is more like it's family. It's probably 2 acres or better, and it just has plants that I'm looking at, seedlings of mine. I grow a lot of azaleas, but I do hollies and dogwoods and just whatever I can get my hands on. But I'm known for my azaleas. And this was a play. This picture here was at my home where, when I was doing some plant breeding, and over the years I planted these. These are all selected varieties of azaleas that I selected, and my evaluation process can go on for years. But on this is all gone now. This is a subdivision. I still live, to the south, but I still enjoy the cows out in the field. But I don't want to have to take care of cows. I just like watching them. But this is some of the azaleas, and in spring I probably walk these paths many a time over the years, looking at these azaleas. And just history wise, I've been working with azaleas for, since probably the late 60s, early 70s. It's a blur. I had a little nursery, some on my parents' property. But this is my children here. They were born in the early 80s, and I was already getting a good bit of doing a good of plant breeding. They often tell me, they weren't smiling, so they said that maybe they wasn't enjoying it, but I think they enjoyed it. And these are hybrid deciduous azaleas I had been working on, and this was in my backyard. I had a nursery, a wholesale nursery called Savannah Spring Nursery, but I kind of tried to keep them separated. And this right here is some of the azalea hybrids that I did. This is probably 85 or 86. And my daughter Kelsey's there. And this hybrid here is actually a species called Rhododendron nakahari, crossed with Rhododendron oldhamii. And I had a picture of some people, about 8 people that in 1980 I started palling around with and doing botany trips. But somewhere I couldn't find that picture. But this man right here is Dr. John Thornton. And most people that know Encore Azaleas, initially I did the breeding work with the Rhododendron oldhamii, a Taiwanese azalea. Well, this is the man that gave me the azalea. Although I didn't start breeding fall multi-seasonal bloom azaleas at that point, I'd already started with cultivars that had a tendency to bloom. Of the 8 people I used to pal around with, this is his business partner here. We did many trips across in the late 70s, 80s, 90s. When we get a chance, he was a veterinarian and I was working, had kids, but every chance we could, we would do these plant trips across the southeast and native azalea, just whatever plant we'd key into. We'd do it all weekend tour trip, and we wouldn't even hardly sleep. He was a very interesting person, but he's the one who gave me the Rhododendron oldhamii 4th of July. He called it 4th of July. And how he ended up, how he got that plant was he's a veterinarian in Michigan, but he kind of always liked plants. And so he gave money to a plant venture, a man by the name of John Patrick in Berkeley, California. And he did plant ventures to get plants, new plants in Taiwan and Southeast Asia. But Dr. Thornton was interested in big leaf rhodies. He was not interested in evergreen azaleas. He was looking for a rhododendron hyperethrum or rhododendron semiarid types. He was doing some heat tolerant breeding. But anyway, he got that little azalea. He just threw it down on the ground and it grew. And I saw it blooming one year, and that I immediately took the pollen and started with a program that I was already working with. And so that's kind of the background of the Encore Azaleas. It started before, because I had a wholesale nursery and I was growing azaleas, I don't know, 300,000 to 500,000 a year wholesale. But the competition was just so tough. I was trying to see how I could grow plants that would bloom better in the fall. And with the rhododendron ohamii, they were more consistent. They bloom more consistent. Well, they were talking earlier about azaleas that were blooming in their yard, presently. And here's one of the azaleas, one of my hybrids that I'm looking at. This was not released. I keep it as a kind of a genetic bank because I like a lot of the characteristics. But this picture was taken just a couple of days ago, and it's been spectacular for about 2 weeks. And we've been having temperatures in mid 90s with heat indexes over 100. And, a lot of plants, especially azaleas, can really, that heat can really put a damper on the blooms. But this one holds up great. And here's another one that's in my yard. And I think it's been blooming for about a month. It just keeps on blooming. But you can see some of the spent flowers are hanging on there just a little bit, but not super noticeable. But this is what's blooming in my yard right now. But going back to development of the Encore Azaleas, I do a lot of controlled and open pollinated pollinations. Here I am. This is a few years ago, and I probably collected some pollen, and I'm doing emasculation and doing some plants. And here's my grandson a few years ago. He's actually, this here is pollen that he's just taking fresh pollen off of one plant, and he's bombarding that plant, the female or the stigma on that one. And just a brief botany class illustration here. This is the stigma. This is the female part. These are the ovaries. This is the style. The entire thing is called a pistil. The pollen goes right there, and it goes down and pollinates the plants. These are the pollen stalks. And some pollen is a lot of azalea pollen doesn't really fly in the air. It kind of sticks to the pollen tubes or the heads, anthers. So, but that's that. And this is this is not an evergreen azalea. I'm sure most of you know this is a deciduous azalea. But what I like about this picture is the female or the pistil is just more pronounced. Get a better idea of that. Here is the pollen stalks, and there's the pollen. And I do a lot of deciduous azalea crosses also. And here's my grandson. Now, he's collecting pollen here, but he's also taking a lot of fresh pollen and pollinating here. Again, this is a deciduous azalea, and but the same technique. Just a lot of patience and good eyesight. And this is a young man, Trace, that works for me. But now this is more, the breeding he's doing here is more exact. Now, I don't know how he come up with this, but this is, I believe, a battery operated toothbrush. And he did it somehow. So when he collects pollen, he can put it on that, and he can work the pollen in the little, in these flowers, and he's emasculating the flowers. He's removing the pollen stalks and leaving the female part. But this plant right here is a rhododendron. It will not grow very long in the deep south because it can't take the heat. Um, and here's a tropical rhododendron, still in the rhododendron family, very closely related to azalea. I do a good bit. We're doing a lot of work with more tropical type rhodies, just to get a lot of the color and fragrance and stuff out of there. But see, here they are. They putting the pollen right there. Now this one was not emasculated, or the pollen stalks were not removed, because this plant is basically self-sterile, and so we're just crossing it with another tropical rhodie. That this is in, and this in the more controlled settings, we have that in greenhouses, or we bring it inside a house, or we bag the actual plant uh, that we've pollinated, so that those pesky bees and everything else won't go behind those and maybe repollinate it. Here's just another example of field pollinations, open field pollination. That's a guy that works for me. He has, after a while, you have to have reading glasses, and you can, after about an hour, you have to take a break. But these are open field pollination, just a whole different thing that that I'm working with. But so back to the evergreen azaleas, when you put the pollen there, and the pollen goes down the stalk, and it goes into the ovary, and hopefully you get a connection. It starts developing seed. This one is developing seed. This is the calyx. And on this one's got an odd calyx, but these are just forming. These are taken. And I usually take the flower off fairly fast, because there's a lot of diseases that will get on azalea petals, fungal diseases and stuff. And if it goes down the here and get here, that fungal disease will branch off into there and destroy your seed. And I kind of learned this. I've had some plant science in college, and but just different things. But a lot of the stuff and techniques that I've done, that I do even now, are more, I guess you could call, just homegrown pollination, or with the group of people I used to in the 80s. They were very plant savvy. They knew a lot, but a lot of them do plant breeding, and but back on, if it's a successful seed set, you'll get a seed capsule on these azaleas. Now, what we're doing, I'm blending traits to try to make, multi-seasonal bloomers and things like that. So we take pollen from a plant that's got a trait that I'm interested in, and I pollinate, the female part with a plant that's got traits that I'm interested in, and hopefully, we can get some, get good mix there. And I grow a lot of seeds. These are little baby azalea seed. And every once in a while, you'll get a little mushroom or something growing in them. I always say they're cute. They don't really hurt the plants. But, we do hundreds of crosses per year, and we have more seedlings than we can take care of. And here's my granddaughter. She's taking the little seedlings out, and these are 50 trays. And she'll do it for about 15, 20 minutes, but she gets, and then she'll come back. It's just fun. I try to get all my grandkids involved, but I mean, I just enjoy watching them do it. But she likes planting little baby azaleas. They go in 50s. We grow them, and then we put them in 4-inch. It's maybe 6 months later. And as you can see on this azalea here, you see that variegation, and you might think it's diseased, but actually that in this tray, that is a trait or goal that we're aiming for foliage. I mean, I look at azaleas more than just the flower, the growth habit. I'm looking at roots and plants that that are tough, plants that have I hate to use the word resistant, but I would prefer to use the word tolerant against pests. And so I don't really, we spray on our azaleas, we spray very little. This year we did have to spray for red mites for some reason, but I found that liquid Dawn is very good at that. I've never really used liquid Dawn before, and I sprayed it today. I have a garden, and I sprayed some on my okra because I was getting aphids on there, and I came back and they were gone. I'm like, hey, this is I despise spraying, but my goal is not to spray. I want to see what plants survive the best. And see, we pot up thousands of seedlings. This is my plant breeding growing house or whatever you see. It's in 3 sections, so we can have we create different environments for different plants. I like sugar cane and pineapples also. That's just something I like. And once the plants are big enough, this is another granddaughter, and she wasn't supposed to be picking those flowers. But if you look back here, that is freshly potted evergreen azaleas. And we made pot, I believe one year we planted 33,000 of them, from numerous crosses. My goal is I like big numbers if I can take care of them, because the larger the number, the more variation and diversity you see in that cross. Some people only grow maybe 100 seedlings of a cross, but I like to grow as many as I can. Sometimes I overdo it. But she loves picking those native azaleas, and it's truly, when native azaleas, these yellows and all this pop up, I mean, they are showstoppers. So in time as it goes on, and that's me, I have lost some weight, but I think I gained that much back. But this is a few years ago, and here it is early spring, and I go up and down these rows, and I'm looking for certain things, and I'll tag them. I think this group was like 33,000 plants, and you're looking for that outstanding. Initially, you're looking for good foliage and outstanding flower. The flower is probably the number one thing that people look at initially. But once you select them all out and start growing them, in bigger containers in the ground, propagation, a lot of them will just start falling out. And so this is another section of my nursery. And here's some azaleas that this is what it would look like after looking at this picture. This is kind of what we look like. We will segregate the ones together and grow them, and we'll usually put them in bigger containers, and just keep evaluating them, looking at them, and we have to discard them, a good many of them. A lot of them fall on the wayside, but whatever comes, freezing weather, hot, scorching weather, if it damages them and this, that, and the other, we discard them. Or this is two of my granddaughters here, but I don't think much work was done that day with them, but they sure enjoyed azaleas. These are a lot that we're discarding. You can't keep all of the plants. I'm the kind of person, I want to keep every one that I can. And here's my 2 grandsons. We're giving some deciduous azaleas away because they're beautiful. It's just it wasn't what I was looking for. And even these azaleas, we were giving these to an estate down the road. They're planting a lot of them. They're gorgeous. I've never seen an ugly azalea, even if I discard it. And here we are loading them up. This guy's taking them and planting them. And I enjoy them, but these are highly selected plants. We have, these have moved forward a good bit in our selection process, and it's tough to discard them. But if he's going to plant them and let me look at them over the years, hey, that's a positive, because I'm certain of many plants that I have gone through, I probably have discarded one of probably the best plant, because as it matures, there's just so much you can do. And then we move them into the ground. We try to keep them grow them in the ground, grow them in containers, and we don't spray them just in case just something terrible, some bad insect comes through. But I want to see what that azalea does in the full sun. I want to see it in the ground. In propagation and just whatever. And some of them are moved up into bigger containers, and we watch them over the years. And uh, this is early. This is probably an early spring bloom, because I do multi-seasonal bloomers, but I also do spring blooming only azaleas. But this is kind of my can yard, or nursery can yard. It isn't neat and clean, but it's I really enjoy it. I've been out there today actually weeding and fertilizing in this heat. It's tough. It's been a tough summer. But so after all of that, um, they said, well, finally, you have to decide on a plant that's got a lot of good traits. And the first rhododendron, the first azalea that I selected out was one that eventually was called Autumn Rouge. And it is a tough plant. It triggers back into growth. It is a hybrid between a cold hardy azalea cultivar and Rhododendron olhamii, which is a little hardy, but it can be a little tender. And so over the years, these have shown really good hardiness. But this is in the summertime, and this was in East Texas, and I don't know what I guess it was on a tour, or I knew these people, and these were Autumn Rouge in full bloom, and this was, I guess, June or June. This was July or sometime, and they had some older ones, and I was just impressed that they look beautiful there. This is Autumn Rouge, but a lot of selection to get that plant. And now here's another one of the earlier ones. Now, some people say this one, if you start going into cold 7 and 6, you can get banged up from the freezes and stuff. But I know people that grow it know how to position an azalea, to protect it, and they do fairly well. But this one was planted, this plant here was planted at an old train depot years ago. And they, several garden clubs had projects there, and they replanted it and they unplanted it, and it grew up in weeds. And it was just, over 20 years or so. But I've noticed one thing: the the autumn embers has survived all the failures and everything. It rooted in the ground extremely well. And around this is Thanksgiving, and you usually pass by this train depot area, and from late October into Christmas, it's bloomed. And these have been cut back down to the ground, but they have regenerated, come back. Just a tough little plant. This is some of the first ones that was named. Here's another one called Autumn Angel. This was the first white Encore Azaleas that I released. If you use Rhododendron olhamii, it's got a brick orange color, and it's a species. And so that color, that genetics is pretty heavy in that plant. So when you do crossing, you do get those more orangish looking colors. But I started doing generational breeding and using using the cold hardy forms. Now this one here is called Autumn Embers, and I remember when they planted them at this location, and I was thinking they will never make it. They will never make it because it's a concrete back. There's a sidewalk here, and it's not a very deep, deep place there, or wide. But they obviously knew what they were doing. They put in some really good soil. It's well drained. They got excellent irrigation system, and these azaleas get direct summer sun from the southwest. There's nothing that blocks it, and that's what when you get a lot of direct sunlight on plants, they can really kind of, it can stress a plant out. But you can tell this is in July. These plants are blooming. Look at the crepe myrtles in the background blooming, and those plants are still there. I guess they had some kind of white theme that they wanted all the way down. It must be 30 or 40 of them planted. but they have done well. They prune. It's not a plant that, it's not really an azalea I would encourage to keep prune low because it kind of wants to get up, but they prune it at the right time. They prune it right after it blooms in the spring, and they keep it at that lower level, and it blooms well for them. Even though it's a small space, they got it elevated, and they got great soil, great drainage. That's Autumn Angel. And this is another one. This is more getting into more of the complex color patterns. This is Autumn Sunburst, and you see that Picardy type edge, and just a spectacular bloom. And if you've ever been to Gibbs Gardens, if you've never been there, it's North Georgia. It is well worth a visit to go see Gibbs Gardens. They have large tulip plantings. They have Japanese maples in the fall of the year. It is the Japanese maple color is just tremendous. He also has a large collection of Encore Azaleas in fairly large plantings. Now, this was a couple years ago, the year that I went there, I was kind of concerned because they had record-breaking cold temperatures. North Georgia is hilly, and they can get into some tough weather. And honestly, all the azaleas, Encore Azalea groups, were blooming well. This one here is just lit up. This is the spring bloom, and this is Autumn Sunburst. Then we get into more complex designs, selections and sports. And this is Autumn Starburst. And this is just a spectacular bloom when it's blooming. My son-in-law has some planted. He works from home. He sells steel and stuff. And outside his bedroom window, we have Autumn Starburst. And, in the fall of the year, all through almost Christmas, he gets flowers. And so, he's not really a big plant person, but he enjoys that one. It's you can see the size and stuff on there. Now, on all these azaleas I'm talking about, you can go to the Encore website and look up all the different sizes. And we put a good bit of energy into the size and width, mature size and width of each Encore Azaleas, the cold hardiness and all that. But now the size and width, as if you're a gardener, everything. It's a good guesstimation, if you want to say, and they usually fall in those ranges. But if you get a plant that's really likes it, you can get a little bit better growth on it. But we would say on the mature size, it's easy to maintain these heights. And on the shade, they like light shade to full sun, but it's always best if you can block them from the hot summer suns. The plants seem not to stress out as bad. Here's another one called Autumn Majesty. Just an unusual color, more of a kind of a dwarf, easy to trigger back into bloom. Very easy to root into your garden soil, but just a really unique flower, a semi double flower, just a really neat azalea. And this azalea here is one called Autumn Fire, and it's got a lot of cold genetics in it. It can take some really cold weather, but when it blooms, it is just unbelievable. It grows very well further north, but even in the south. I was telling you, my son-in-law has that azalea planted by his window, but my daughter has Autumn Fire planted by her front door, and it blooms fairly well. But in December, it's kind of in a protected area. So she gets a lot of blooms in the fall, and she puts her Christmas lights, and from the road, the Christmas lights on those Autumn Fire azaleas are just spectacular. And they growing really well. But again, good soil, and make sure they root it in. Autumn Fire. And this is one of our latest ones that we just released. It's called Autumn Kiss. This azalea has been around. I've been looking at this azalea a good 8, 10 years, and most of the azaleas I release, they're not just we just don't release them right as we. Oh, that's a great bloom. Let's run with it. We put it through a vigorous. At my place before it's moved anywhere else, it goes through a lot of evaluation, and this is it. It's called Autumn Kiss, but it's a petaloid, and it's got deep pink petaloids in the center, and it's just a gorgeous plant. This is a spring bloom here. This was a couple years ago, and I guess the temperature had got down to close to 10 with wind and stuff. Um, with no problems at all. And it's been evaluated. We evaluate plants even further north, and these plants seem to be fair. They're tough, good blooms, a great repeat bloom, kind of a medium growth habit. These will be released next year, but they're quite spectacular. But with all the other azaleas, there's about 30 something azaleas, Encore Azaleas, that's been released and named. And so, we kind of particular, just how many more people say, well, how many more azaleas you got to name? Well, that's not our goal, but this plant here is not named, but it's just a different shade of color. It's quite spectacular. But these are seedlings that are just going through the process. As we discarding plants when we're moving plants and selecting the best bloom, the good growers, tolerant azaleas, we still look at them. Propagation uh, is key. If you can't reproduce the azaleas from propagation, that's not that doesn't bode well for the plant. But I like all kind of irregular stuff, like irregular patterns of bicolors. I've been breeding for that, or these dark colors with these centers, with these. I really enjoyed the dark colors with the bicolors. These are just plants that I'm looking at, or that's coming out of initial evaluations going into it about 4 or 5 years, from the seed, and bicolors and stripes. It's amazing what the potential it is for evergreen azaleas. And one of the things people have been aiming for years, and I've been trying to do it. There's no yellow pigment in evergreen azaleas. There's no evergreen azaleas that that's yellow. And so, and I've been working on that for years. Now, don't let me deceive you here. This is an evergreen azalea flower. There's just one little thing. I just happened to be walking by this azalea, and I had a can of what they call John Deere yellow, and I just kind of sprayed it, and by George, it just absorbed the paint to the T. And so that's what I'm aiming for without the spray can. I would love to produce an azalea that has a bright yellow flower that is fragrant. And I'm working on it. I've been working on it for 40 years, and I'm hoping I'm 40 years closer than I was when I first started. Leaf color, there's a lot of genetic. I've been working, these are several generations of trying to genetically pass on leaf color and different kinds of oddities in in leaf patterns and different kinds of colors on the azalea blooms on these, or just the variegated flowers. But there's really nothing. I mean, I've often thought that azaleas, even though in the South, I mean, the azaleas have a beautiful green color. When they're not blooming, they kind of blend into the entire landscape. And so, I have, but just to be outright courageous and try to get something like this, I guess, just being a plant breeder, that's, I pushed, I really try to go for, unusual stuff. Well, I've talked a good bit about plants, and we But you know, one of the key things is making sure that you plant the plant correctly. And this is Autumn Kiss here. And, you know, azaleas love well drained, acidic soil with a lot of humus compost in it. And they do not like to be planted deep. They have very fibrous root systems, and they you'll just stifle them if you plant them too deep. So when you plant them, make sure your pH, get a good pH. And you know, they say azaleas do really well with 4.5 to 6.5. I prefer like a 5.5, but you know, that's what I'm used to. But if you're in an area that has really poor drained soil, that maybe the pH is too neutral, whatever, you may want to for drainage, go for a raised bed or amend the soil to raise it up so the drainage will be better. Or try to get if there's standing water, just try to make sure you cut a little ditch or something other to get it out of there. But adding pine, I like adding pine bark, and I'm from the lower south, and we just have a good supply of it. Some people like putting peat moss. It's acidic, and you can build a bed up on that. But you know, you got to watch it with peat moss because it can get too wet and stay too wet, or it can get dry, too dry, and it's hard to wet it. So, you know, a raised bed, and usually I like putting pine needles as a mulch. That kind of keeps the plant cool and keeps the weeds out. But so soil to amend it with, I always, I like pine bark, but you can buy different kinds of soil. But and over the years I've looked, I always like to get the soil that doesn't have fertilizer in it, because a lot of these azaleas that you just purchased, they got azalea, they have fertilizer in them. But I don't know. I don't feel safe with a lot of the stuff that has fertilizer in it. I've seen, some problems. I'm sure they may have some good brands out there that doesn't do that, but just pure pine bark or pure, try to use, even if you got acidic soil, use an acidic amendment really helps it. And the pine bark kind of keeps the drainage going up. Raised beds, even in areas that has good soil, raised beds, is a plus for growing azaleas. For fertilizer, always use an acidic fertilizer for azaleas, blueberries, and stuff like that, and don't overdo it. Make sure when you fertilize that plant is well hydrated, not to be dried out. And then put fertilizer on it, then water it heavy, water it in, and that plant's dry. It absorbs that nitrogen if it's quick release, and it can do root damage. But make sure the plant's well hydrated before you fertilize it. When I plant azalea, and because when you in these beds, flower beds, I find it's always better when you plant that azalea. You take it out, just make sure that the root ball is wet. I like it to be soaking wet. I mean, for it to be soaking wet for a little while isn't that big a deal. You don't want to plant an azalea or any shrub when it's in a dry. If the pine bark, the soil root ball is dry, because once you plant it, it's sort of hard to rehydrate that azalea. And so make sure it's wet when you plant it, the root ball. And I always like to plant a couple inches or so above grade of the raised bed or whatever, just to counterbalance what I would call subsidence. You don't want the plant to sink below, and the roots get below the soil surface, because it may not kill it, but it could kill it if it's too deep. But it just it just kind of slows the plant down. And so when mulch, pine needle mulch or pine bark mulch, it keeps the weeds kind of out for a while, and it keeps the plant cool in the summer. It keeps moisture down there, and in the wintertime, it helps protect the plant. But the key thing on azaleas is make sure you got a good irrigation system, or you're going to water them for that first year. And that's like most plants. You just can't, in most cases, you can't just plop them in the ground and walk off. And they need a little baby and care to get them well established. And so, and water them in. Another key point I'd like to point out is like when you azaleas, when you prune them, uh, if they don't need pruning, don't prune them. But if you want to maintain them, as for Encore azaleas, it's best to prune them, I find, right after they bloom in the springtime, just immediately after they bloom. You want Encore azaleas to if you prune them, you want them to trigger into growth. You want them to take off growing, and they'll start as they grow. Flower buds will start forming on the tips of the new growth. So as soon as you can get it to growing after the spring bloom, the faster that you'll get a repeat bloom. But now, if it doesn't need pruning and you're happy with it, just let it go. On regular azaleas, you could probably wait to June or so. Different areas have different cutoff dates because they'll grow, they'll set a bloom bud, but that bloom bud will become dormant and it'll go all the way till the spring before it opens. But and even with Encore azaleas, as the weather cools off, a lot of the bloom buds just turn dormant and they'll store it. They'll rebloom in the spring. But the pruning, and you can do light pruning in the fall, but I discourage any heavy pruning of any plants in the fall of the year because our heavy fertilizing, because both of those, heavy pruning and too much fertilizer in the fall, has a tendency to make the plant want to spring into new growth. And so in the fall, you kind of want your azaleas to be acclimating to the cooler weather, trying to get it to get ready to settle in to face the winter, the winter conditions. So it'll be acclimated to cold weather. And if you got too much spring new growth on it, you can get some leaf burn and scorch. But that's if you take care of them, azaleas are there. I mean, can be there for a lifetime or longer. I mean, there's abandoned buildings and houses all over the country, in woods, and springtime you'll see azaleas blooming. But here's a neat little planting of autumn kiss, and that's it. That's the end of my slide presentation. So I'm going to exit out and see if anybody wants to ask some questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. That was fantastic. I really appreciate it. We do have several questions that people have entered in the chat, and uh, I will go ahead and read those to you. We now have an infinity window because you're also sharing your screen. Perhaps you can stop sharing at this point, and you'll be able to see everybody's faces and
Okay.
see.
Okay.
I think that's good. So Chris asked if there are any plans to have a middle of the summer blooming azalea like the 4th of July plant that you showed.
The several of them have July blooming time. I have numerous ones of them blooming now. This is in the deep south, but so they've got some more growth on them. But the autumn rouge and the embers, and the repeat bloom a lot of times has, it's the climatic conditions also. If you have a really nice spring and you have rain going into July, you probably would get blooms a lot faster. But if you have a lot of heat and dry weather coming in, it may hold back a while.
Yeah.
But even now, like I say, with autumn, several of them have been blooming. We've had a really extreme heat.
It's all making a change for all of us, but it's good to see what's happening down in your way in Louisiana. Do you ever get super genetic dwarfs that pop up? Do you
Y-
save them?
Yes. I do have numerous dwarf plants, and they're really neat. They've not been released though because it's hard to get a lot of small. A lot of people want smaller plants, but they tend to want them to grow faster. When they get them in the yard, like I've been there for 2 or 3 years. Yes, I do have dwarf ones. I've just never released them. It seems like the industry per se has not said, has not really wanted a super dwarf. And there is some issues with super dwarf ones. You can get a lot more web blight and stuff in there because of their compactness. You know, but all yes, I have.
Yeah.
I get all kind of as many thousands of seedlings I grow. I get all kind of unusual stuff.
I bet. I bet. Kiki wanted to ask, when will we see Encore azaleas with yellow variegated leaves come to market?
Well, and I didn't show a picture of one. We have one that's I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, it's a variegated leaf Encore Azalea that we've just released. It's a white bloom. It's mostly white and green variegated, but it does have in the later part of the year it does have golden variegation. Um, with 33 plants, I think I'm embarrassed. I can't remember the name of it. But if you go to the Encore website, you can see the variegated leaf one. But now the golden variegated leaf, and those we're close to a lot of different types of purple leaf evergreen azaleas, and that holds its purple color. Uh, you know, just I think I'm close to a lot of different variegated leaf clones possibly coming out in the near future.
Now, I've heard people say that the variegated ones tend to have less vigor. How do you find the vigor with the variegated ones?
Well, no, well, that is true. Um, that's why it has taken me so long to get one that has vigor.
Hmm.
There's numerous ones that have variegated, like well, there's a silver sword variegation. It's an azalea that was on the market. It's fairly slow, and it can get kind of wiry. So it's a novelty plant, but it can be quite beautiful if in its right place and it's in its heyday in its glory. But that's been you can get a lot of some variegated plants that I have gotten that has vigorous growth. They won't bloom. You would think an azalea that it just for some reason, you're not getting enough chlorophyll or it's genetically out of whack. But there's several we have that's really good growers, really great bloomers. We have to just keep on evaluating and looking at them.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. When you do have an individual plant that you want to sell, how do you propagate it at scale? How do you make that transition?
Well, initially, after we've narrowed it down a goal or a plant that we look at, we may have 10 or 15 of them. We will propagate each one of them and run it through a propagation test. But once those pan out, they go to larger nurseries, and and azaleas produce a lot of cuttings, so it just takes 2 or 3 years. The next thing you get those rooted in a greenhouse. They're growing. You get cuttings off of them. Before you know it, you got a lot of azaleas. But you really need at least 30,000 to 40,000 azaleas to if you launch to launch a new plant. Because if you start talking about it and you don't have it, people tend to get aggravated. But mass
Yeah.
production, I don't do the production here at my nursery. There's many other big nurseries that do the production
Mhm.
of flowerwood, and there's other line of growers. We sell. I don't know how many nurseries actually sell Encore azaleas, grow Encore azaleas, wholesale growers. There's a lot of people that sell them, and there's numerous ones of them actually do the propagation. and they propagate their own. We have a, our growers can grow what they want, and the varieties they want, because with all plants, some varieties just excel in certain parts of the U.S., and others maybe not do as well. But that's just the nature of plants.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's any plant. Yeah.
mhm.
So when we go to the nursery and we see, say, a 1 quart, azalea, how old is that azalea?
Well, it could just be a year and a half old, from a
Okay.
cutting.
Yeah.
I don't know of very many Encore Azaleas. I don't know if there's so many in quarts, but in I've been in the nursery business for years. At one time, this was years before. Well, this is why I was actually doing breeding work. Uh, I used to grow 4-inch containers, azaleas. And you see, I could root them in the fall. I could plant them in the spring, and I could sell them that fall. So really, from a cutting to a sellable thing, you could do it in a year if you really was pushing it. But that's
Hmm.
just your classic Southern Indica azaleas, and the old tried and true. And but that market now, there's a lot of florist azaleas sold in smaller containers. I don't really see a lot of just landscape plants, but now online there's just all kind of stuff you can buy in all size containers and stuff.
Yeah. Is it another question from Chris? Can you order all of the released Encore azaleas on the Encore website, or do you have to buy from a local grower? I even know that Home Depot sells Encore. So,
Yes, they do. And I don't know all the range. You can go to the website, Plants by Mail. I believe that's still the name. And you can buy or request. It may take a little bit, but I think all the Encore azaleas can be bought through Plants by Mail. I think you can even go to Lowe's or Home Depot. I'm not certain about this. And you can request an azalea
hmm.
and get it shipped to you also, even though if that's not on the I'm talking where I don't really know all the mechanics of it, but you
I think you
can
can,
get,
and you can also go on the Home Depot website online and
yes,
order one. And of course, you have shipping charges, but if they,
yes,
so
yeah,
that's the only drawback. But yeah, so earlier this week, many members of the Garden Club were talking about blue rhododendrons and
yes.
and how there have been a few, how they really don't make it here in the Washington DC area because it's just too hot. Are there any heat tolerant blue rhododendrons? Like,
Not that I
have
know.
you gotten like blue barren into any of your encores or anything?
Well, I'm that's another excuse me. That's another goal that I'm aiming for is blue in azaleas. And if you saw the guy that was doing the breeding work with the little tooth electric toothbrush, he was actually what we were trying to do. We collected pollen from that. That's a rhododendron called Rhododendron augustinii, which can be a blue blooming rhodie. It lived until about last week. We got it last fall, but it doesn't do well in the DC area at all. But what I'm trying to do is take the pollen from it, even though it's a far cross, and incorporating it in evergreen azaleas and get some heat tolerance. And like I said, we're dealing with a lot of other rhodies that are not what you would call true azaleas, trying to get other traits bombarded into azaleas, because azaleas tend to be fairly heat tolerant, and you can get some that are very cold tolerant. A lot of your rhodies, they just can't take the heat, the extreme heat, where azaleas can. But I'm working on a blue azalea.
So when you do that crossing, do you consider the chromosome number? Could you use impiditum to get blue? Impiditum. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that first time.
Diploid. Is it diploid or diploid or diploid? And we look at,
Yeah.
is
Well,
that,
there's that, but then there's also impiditum. Oh, he's now I'm reading the chat. as I speak. He says diploid, diploid,
Diploid.
diploid.
Ye-
Yeah,
Yes. And we look at that. I have a lot of deciduous azaleas that are multiploids that's been developed um, by different people, and I've grown the seed. Yes, we look at that, but that doesn't stop us from trying. You know, from most azaleas are diploid or diploid, you know, but you can use chemicals to increase the ploidy levels, and I really don't do that a lot, you know. But if we know the chromosome level of a plant, we will do different breeding work with it. But I've not been successful with it. You know, it's kind of a the guy that asked the question probably knows more about that than me.
that's Chris. He might. He might. Um, so some of us are thinking about the business perspective. How many employees do you have this week to manage those 30,000 seedlings each year?
Well, actually, you know,
Besides your grandchildren, because we know about
oh
fair,
well now
labor
sometimes
laws.
really sometimes we do the work after they're gone, but you know they've been as they get old they're really helpful. But only I have it's just my wife and myself, and we have two employees. Excuse me. And the guy that was doing he's been in nursery business his entire life. The young guy with the red cap on, he's from the University of North Carolina, and he's been with me for about 3 years. And he is really passionate about all kinds of plants, you know, and you know, uh, at first I think he thought I wasn't really working on a whole lot of different stuff, but he's really enthused right now with the different types of roadies we're trying to incorporate. Just and you know, there's been so much breeding work done. You have to kind of go out in left field and do odd stuff. You gotta, you know, I mean, not sounding kind of crazy here, but you have to go for the unusual. You have to go for the improbable to get really unique stuff. And the failure rate is really is probably high. It is high because it's hard to do. It's hard to do. I mean, you know, that's why a lot of people are not doing, you know, or there's a lot, but even with my azalea breeding, you know, the generations that I've come just with different traits and brought that out is a long drawn out process. And then it's amazing. You can take these traits and then all of a sudden the traits disappear, you know, like, you know, and it always has to do with genetics and stuff like that, what the DNA or what's recessive and, you know, but, but I've never let that stuff get in my way of trying to do plant breeding, the intellect part of it.
I like that you make that extra reach. That's fantastic. I'm going to make this our last question to respect
Okay.
your time. Chris asked, I see many plantings of encores and they have three colors of flowers in each cluster. Is this the way they are supposed to look, or are the flowers aging and causing this effect?
No, well, I imagine the one that he's seeing is, you know, maybe is autumn twist. Now, autumn twist was a vegetative sport from autumn royalty, and it was stable for years. You would only see the stripes and stuff. I didn't bring my water with me, but anyway, as time has gone on, you get take a sip for me, please.
I just did that. Yeah, it was very helpful to me, and I hope it conveyed over to you.
Right. But as time has gone on, it seems to revert back to the royalty, which is purple. And you know, a lot of people like that mixed color, you know. But like if you just want the variegated to stay variegated, just go there and cut the reversion out, and you can maintain that. And that's but you know for years, like I said, it was very stable, so that's why we kind of went with it. But we still sell a lot, and we see a lot of them that has the mixed flowers, and they bloom at the same time, and people kind of like it, you know,
Well, then
unless you,
go with it. Make it a feature. But I do like the ones that are the more pure stars myself.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Well, this has been so educational and so wonderful. I really appreciate your taking the evening to spend with us, Mr. Lee.
great.
And I will send you an email sometime tomorrow or over the weekend with the recording. And I thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. Everyone have a great evening. Okay.
All right, take
Bye
care.
bye.